You're listening to Through Help and Back. Through Help and Back is a podcast focused on mental health, addiction, treatment, recovery, and all things related to personal improvement and wellness. Don't worry, we're not here to talk about problems without solutions, and we're definitely not here to talk about struggles without success. So come with your problems, leave with our solutions. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Through Help and Back. If you've made it this far, you've heard the intro, you know what we're all about. Today is July the 11th, so we are in the dog days of summer. I'm probably feeling that. You're probably seeing that, but that's okay. We're in the studio now. I've got producer Leo with me, so we've got a smooth ride in front of us. We're going to stay cool and we're going to stay calm and collected. Leo's going to guide us through as we relax here. So very excited for today's show. We talk a lot about what's going on in the world of psychotherapy, what's going on in the world of human and personal development. And one of the hot topics, I guess, that has been around for a long time, but has made its way into the sort of general awareness and the general population is this topic of neurodivergence. So today we have brought on an expert on that topic, all things neurodivergence, all things communication and communication gaps. Brian King is an MSW. He is with us today. Brian is an author 5 times, I believe, if I have that right, has been in private practice for 17 years, working in the field of neurodivergence, working with communication, doing mentoring, and really has a amazing combination of personal experience combined with professional experience. And I think he has a lot to offer and a lot to share with us today. So, Mr. King, Brian, welcome, sir. How are you?
I'm doing splendidly, Jason. Thanks for having me on.
It's good. I'm just doing okay. You're doing splendidly. So you're gonna have to carry me this hour.
It's a way for me to practice those big words.
Gotcha. So speaking of big words, let's dive right in, right? Because I think people have sort of a general awareness of neurodivergence, but with your experience and your expertise, how do you define neurodivergence, and what do you want people to be aware of or think of when it comes to neurodivergence?
Neurodivergence is a paradigm that basically states things like autism, ADHD, bipolar anxiety are normal variations of the human brain and don't require pathologizing. And it's taken on a social action kind of vibe in that it's trying to impress upon society that just because we have a label doesn't mean we're less than, to be looked down upon. We are as good as you. So it's a movement for inclusion. And as it's gone over the years, it's kind of not only picked up steam and recognition, it's also picked up additional diagnoses, because in its original inception, it was kind of like for the Asperger's flavor of autism, which now got rolled into the larger autism designation. But as it grew, other people started raising their hands saying, what about us? My brain just works a little differently too. Can't I be included? And a lot of public discussion has taken place largely online, if not predominantly, and people are starting to recognize certain diagnoses in themselves they might not have considered previously. And in doing so, they're able to find a community and a sense of purpose that they may have lacked before. So it's really an ongoing conversation around who's considered neurodivergent, how do we come together in one voice, and also recognize the unique needs of our individual sub-community. Like the folks with bipolar are going to need different attention than the people with ADHD. So did that answer your question?
Yes, it did. And it gave me several other questions. So I'll ask you, is it a fair parallel to think about the evolution of neurodivergence and our understanding of that as an issue around inclusion, sort of like the LGBT community, right? Like, so there's one group, it comes out, there's 4 letters, now there's 9 letters, things have evolved, and people are sort of like, okay, so who's in, who's not in, right? And what does it mean to kind of be in the club? So if it's that similar type of evolution, I guess I'll start with that first question. Who is included? Who's in the club if we're talking about neurodivergence? You had mentioned Asperger's and autism, and who else is in?
I use the basic criteria of your brain differs from the norm because there's differences in how you process information, whether it be sensory, whether it be thinking. So there are other reasons that can happen to a person. A traumatic brain injury can cause that. And depending on the extent of the injury, it may never improve. Are we going to say you're not included, even though you could really use some people that empathize and can give you strategies for self advocacy because you weren't born with it, you don't count? That's ridiculous. And people that have chronic mental health issues. And somebody kind of pushed back when I suggested that, saying it's not the same because people with mental health can get better. Yeah, that's true, but so can people that are bipolar or Asperger's or autism. The fact that we can learn skills that buffer the more difficult aspects of our neurodivergence doesn't mean that we're excluded. Anybody can grow. You need to grow. That's what we sign up for as human beings. So using that as a barometer just doesn't make sense.
Right. No, it's funny. I was just by luck this weekend, I was flipping through and watching TikToks and reels and stuff like that, and all that really healthy stuff for your brain, just doom scrolling. And one of the things that, and they were talking about it in kind of a comedic effect, but they were showing old ads from like the 70s and 80s for people who are like mentally handicapped, right? And they were saying like, look, I can hold a job. I can pay taxes. I can maintain my own household, And they had an individual who was sharing his experience, and he was working at like a processing plant, a waste processing plant. And he ended with the line, like, we have a lot to offer. Please don't throw us away, And I feel like everything old is new again, because now we're sort of applying that same idea, or should be applying that same idea, to the neurodivergent population. Let's not focus so much on what their limitations are, but let's focus on what's possible and what they can do instead of what they can't.
Last time I checked, the unemployment rate for people with autism alone is like 80%.
Wow.
Now you consider what it is across the board for neurodivergence, especially for people who don't know that that's their issue. They just know they can't hold a job, and they get overwhelmed when the boss gives them a bunch of directions, and they're always forgetting where their place was. And then people come down on them saying, you got to grow up. You got to be more motivated.
Do you include ADD in this, ADHD?
Oh, absolutely.
Because I see a lot of that. I see a lot of that sort of want to do it, but just inability to focus,
ADHD could carry our flag in the Olympics, man. That's how much it's included.
But Brian, where did your interest in this field come from? It's an expanding part of the field, but it used to be fairly niche, and you've been at this for quite a while. So what brought you to this?
My sons. When my oldest, when he was 7 years old, he's now 25, when he was diagnosed with Asperger's in first grade, the school did not respond well to him. They wanted him to be medicated and to sit there, be normal, and don't cause any problems. Well, that wasn't enough for him. He was frequently running out of the room, having anxiety attacks, pushing back against the authority. All of this could be accommodated, but they didn't want to consider that. Now, the teacher did. Teacher was totally on board, but the administrators didn't want to be bothered. I needed to get information on how to help him because the professionals weren't. And in researching all this stuff, I started seeing some red flags for myself. And long story short, I got my own diagnosis, which took a couple years for me to wrap my mind around, because all that time I had considered myself typical. Maybe a little eccentric, but typical. And once I was able to kind of come home to it, I became his advocate. I became his translator, helping other people understand him and his internal world. And I ended up, as part of getting my own support, at a parent support group for parents that have kids on the spectrum. I discovered pretty quickly, because of the feedback I was receiving, that I was giving the members of the group better feedback and better advice than the professionals they were working with. So when they found out I was in social work, they said, if you hang out your shingle, we will bring our kids to you and tell all of our friends to bring their kids to you. And when it got too hard to juggle a day job with all the crises happening at school, I decided to give it a shot. Back in that day, like 2006-07, I was an anomaly. The idea of somebody on the spectrum with a professional degree serving people on the spectrum was like, hey, I found the needle in the haystack. My schedule was flooded. In about 4 months' time, I replaced my daytime income just working evenings. That's how big the demand was. Now, every other person has a social work degree, has got their PhD, and so I don't stand out as much.
Right. Well, Yes and no, right? Because having worked in the field myself and, still working in the field, I do think it's important to highlight the fact that, training and awareness in a particular issue is so much different than expertise, right? I just really believe that. And so, yes, through my master's program and graduate studies, yes, I was introduced to these concepts. Yes, I had a cursory awareness. Yes, you do your own reading. But to take that to a level of expertise where, I know of what you're dealing with versus I know what you're dealing with.
You can read about getting your butt kicked, watch
Right.
movies about it, and say, man, that must be rough. But when it happens to you, you understand it on a level that cannot be described. There are no words for it. You only know it by being in that place.
And you can't fake it. And people who are also getting their butts kicked know the people that know. They connect with that.
If anybody is faking it, shame on them. Because as much as people say, well, I have pride in my disabilities, I have autism pride. Speaking for myself, this isn't something I would have signed up for. But since it is my reality, I must do the utmost with it.
And what's interesting about your story, too, that you just shared was you went through a big chunk of your life, all the formative years, without that awareness, without that support. So can you tell me a little bit about kind of like for you, what life was like before and after this awareness?
Before, it was miserable. I never felt like I fit in anywhere. Even with the people that welcomed me, I always felt like I was behind somehow. Like they were having a conversation, they were laughing it up, and I thought to myself, I hope they don't figure out I'm confused. So I would mostly be quiet so people would think I was shy. No, I was confused. I had no idea what the heck was going on. What did people laugh at? What line did they just say? And in school, I was bullied a lot. I was very emotionally sensitive. People took advantage of that. And I kind of survived all those years. I had a bunch of girlfriends, here and there, but I screwed it up every time. I always found a way to blow it because I was doing something that was off-putting or offensive, but she never told me what it was. I should know better. All of those lines to not bring me into the fold and help me improve myself. And when I graduated high school, I graduated with an aggressive form of testicular cancer.
Oh.
So I spent the summer in chemotherapy. And it was after that I pretty much put my foot down and said, no more being angry, no more being afraid. I'm going to live a life that is deliberate and purposeful and optimistic. Now, it wasn't a smooth ride. It sure as heck wasn't linear. It was, one step forward, 10 steps back, but I still had my focus on I'm not going to be beaten. I'm not going to be held back by fear or anything like that. So I have been educating myself in an immersive way in all of the different things that I struggled with so that I could have the results I wanted regardless of my challenges. When I had my boys, it like gave meth to that purpose because with my boys, I have to prepare them for adulthood, and they're all on the spectrum, all have ADHD. And if I can't model for them how to continue to work through your challenges and setbacks, who the heck is going to? And in addition to my neurodivergence, because I've been diagnosed with autism, ADHD, dyslexia, probably dyscalculia, which is like math dyslexia. On top of that, I also have multiple sclerosis and Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. So I'm dealing with physical disability on top of that. However, I'm relentless. If something tries to slow me down, okay, good for you. I'm going to keep pushing and pick up momentum again. People tend to minimize their own struggles in comparison.
Right, you do.
When they don't realize is, just because somebody, fell onto a boulder doesn't mean that pebble in your shoe doesn't need to be dealt with. Because over time, that pebble is going to throw off the alignment of your gait and your low back is going to start to hurt. Any problem doesn't lose importance just because you can always find a comparison to make it feel smaller too. It's like deal with it when it's a molehill. Don't wait till it's a mountain to think, now it's worth dealing with.
Correct.
A problem is a problem.
I talked about that in other episodes. In behavioral health, we have this in mental health, and this is individuals and practitioners, we almost have this weird habit of waiting till things get bad enough to be treated, right? Like in physical health, a lot of times you'll deal with the warning signs, but in mental health, self-care, the things that kind of keep us going, you mentioned I was just surviving. I think a lot of people do just survive for a long time and carry this stuff around before they decide, okay, well, now it's bad enough. Now it's threatening my life. Now I'm having panic attacks every day and can't go to work. Now the molehill has become a mountain, and I'll start dealing with it, when it would have been so much more helpful and probably more successful if you dealt with it at the molehill level. Brian, where does your determination come from? Because it sounds like the first part of your life, you weren't that like bring it on determined guy, was it?
Oh, not even close.
Yeah. So there was a switch. Was it, around the health scare? Was it around your children?
Absolutely was that, because I spent the whole time through chemo being terrified. My doctors were terrible communicators. They would give me these vague answers when I would say, is the chemo working? They wouldn't just tell me, yeah, the tumor's shrinking. The blood tests are better. They wouldn't tell me that. They'd just say, oh, well, we're confident. I don't care that you're confident. Give me something measurable, right?
Yeah, right.
So it wasn't until I was told that, hey, you're in remission, no signs of cancer, that I could just say, whew. And after having been that afraid, that depressed, I got suicidal. There was one time I got so mad I punched a hole in my bedroom wall. And the emotions I had were so extreme. Knowing that I could go that low and come out the other side helped me realize that I had more strength than I first thought. And it was stuff I couldn't avoid. I couldn't avoid feeling that stuff. So knowing that I just kind of came out of a wrestle with mortality, it was kind of hard to feel scared. But I felt like I just crossed the desert and I had my first sip of water on the other side. Hey, I'm alive, man. This is incredible. I took it for granted. I've got a second chance. I'm not going to blow it. So a lot of that drive was gratitude, enthusiasm, curiosity. There was some survivor's guilt too, because I met a couple of people along the way who didn't make it. And I saw them having just as much to give as anyone. And if they got taken away from the world, I'm not going to let a moment pass. And I got to be honest, sometimes it turns into a little workaholism.
Sure.
So I've got to keep that in check, trying to find my balance day after day.
Sure, like all of us. And I do think things change when you get tangible evidence that the clock is ticking. You know what I mean? It's sort of hard to turn that back off and just zone out for a couple of days and recharge or relax, because a switch gets thrown where those are now wasted days instead of like recovery days, you know? So that's a challenge. You go through this and then you have your boys, you recognize that they have challenges. 3 for 3, that's a challenge to deal with as well. We know the genetic component there, but so what did you do differently with your boys that you wish people had done with you to help them adjust and help them thrive instead of just survive?
Patience, compassion, educating themselves, apologizing to me for what they did when they didn't get it, because that's something I did with my oldest. I apologized for the swats on the butts and the raised voice and anything that I might have done to upset him, because I didn't know he needed something more.
Did they forgive you? Did you feel like they got it? They accepted that?
I still apologize when, say, I lose my temper, or I tease them when I said I wouldn't do that anymore. And I make a point of letting them know that even though I didn't mean it, I own it. Because there are people I will say, oh, I didn't mean to run you over with my car. Yeah, but you were driving, dude.
Well, and that owning it too has probably been key to your survival situation in terms of not falling into perpetual victimhood with the challenges that you face. You know?
I don't do helpless. I'm not a victim. When something happens where there's an exacerbation of one of my conditions or something like that, I tell myself this is an opportunity to be resourceful. Like, my back hurts, well, I can complain about the fact that it hurts, or I could get my TENS unit, I could go get some ice, I could lay down and just adjust.
Yeah, a lot of meditation practice and yoga and mindfulness talks about, observing non-judgmentally, right? So instead of the pain in my back meaning something, right? That's the meaning I gave it. Oh gosh, it means, I'm going to be paralyzed. It means the end is near. It means I'll never get better. It's more about the fact of just observing. Your body has sent you a signal. Oh, okay. So there's some pain there.
The moment you start telling yourself a story, you suffer. But if you just see it as it is, say, oh, this is unpleasant. I recognize this unpleasantness as pain. What can I do to address it? And I go through my list of options in my head. I pick one and deal with it.
To back up a little bit, because I'm sure there's parents listening and parents going through this challenge of, do I have a difficult child or do I have a divergent child, right? And so having gone through that 3 times, also probably self-diagnosing and looking back retrospectively in your life, what are the warning signs? What are the things that parents should be looking for that are on that line between discipline and divergence?
Looking for the degree of the issue. Some kids might be a little shy, a little clumsy socially. Neurodivergent kids they simply have no idea what's going on socially. They are confused. Maybe they end up playing by themselves. It's difficult to get them to stick with the group. Their emotional reactions to frustration seem over the top, like they're super, super sensitive over little things. They don't want to share. It's like they have difficulty being part of the group. Or they may come in like a bulldozer. They'll be in charge, bossing everyone around. They'll be talking nonstop, and they won't care if anybody's listening. So looking for that social piece, a lot of social clumsiness, awkwardness. You may also see they're either incredible academically or they really struggle. They're anxious a lot. You'll probably see them being more anxious when you want them to leave the house or go into an area that's unpredictable or crowded.
What you're telling me is look in the far outlier regions on either side.
Because typically, especially with autism and ADHD, you have the default setting of all or nothing. The emotions are all or nothing. Their interests are all or nothing. Their reactions are all or nothing. They seem apathetic or over the top. So when you see that happening, chances are you're going to fall into one of those categories. Or you may have some emotional dysregulation, bipolar. So you can see debilitatingly depressed or so manic they're not thinking realistically.
It's interesting, the overlap. So I worked in addiction for a long time, and I used to say that a huge accomplishment for an addict is to have an okay day, because they're either a 1 or a 10, right? It was the worst day ever, or this is the greatest day ever, right? And they don't hang out much in the 4, 5s, and 6s. They don't have like the normal kind of ups and downs, like it's a boring day, but kind of good, kind of bad, just sort of a mix. It was okay. And I was always talk about how, wow, if you get to a place where you can just have an okay day, that would be a huge accomplishment, right? Because they tend to be in those extremes. And it sounds like there's a little bit of this happening in this world as well, too. All or nothing, good or bad.
A lot of difficulty even acknowledging that the gray exists for some of these folks, because they want certainty. Certainty is what gives them a sense of safety and control. So even if they could entertain the middle, they may avoid it because in the middle, things can change. You start at one point, and then while you're out and about, oh, let's do this instead. Or, hey, we didn't see that coming. You're all or nothing. That kind of stuff is forbidden. It has to be certain or you're not leaving your house.
Why does this happen? Is this learned? Is this a psychological problem? Is this an actual physical brain misfiring or miswiring? Like what's the origin of this?
It's anybody's guess. There's so much just anecdotal evidence that ADHD is inherited. When you see dad has it, all the kids have it. It wasn't a fluke.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And this can happen anywhere in the world. And there are some folks that say we were always there, but we were masking. But now that it's more acceptable and the diagnoses are much more mainstream, everybody's coming out of the closet. I don't know that that's the case. I know when we all got diagnosed, we figured out my mom had raging ADHD. My dad had Asperger's. My oldest brother probably has Asperger's. Second oldest brother, ADHD. So they didn't really embrace it like I did, but it gave a lot of grace to my father. who'd been beating himself up mercilessly his whole life. They pushed him through high school in the 50s because they didn't know how to teach him. Actually, they pushed him all through school. He has really bad dyslexia. He couldn't read what they were giving him. He had a hard time taking notes or writing the papers, but they didn't want to fail him, so they just kept moving him through. Things have changed so much. But as far as nobody's found a gene yet for any of these, but there are signs it's heritable. But let's be honest, when you got people diagnosing themselves from TikTok videos, a lot of these numbers may be the self-diagnosed.
Yeah, I do grow tired of if you do these three things, you probably have ADD videos or ADHD. That's like one of the big ones. And it's like, have you ever forgotten your keys? Oh, you got it. And there's somebody like, oh, yeah, acting that out. Some of that's normal life.
It's kind of like saying if you got a mole on your arm, it's probably cancer.
That's WebMD, right? You go on WebMD, you're going to get cancer.
Because there's like 9 criteria for ADHD. So if you only got 3, that means you're probably human.
Well, and like trauma, I mean, a lot of this is so highly individualized, right? I mean, it's funny, we've been tossing the word normal around a lot. And the obvious question there is sort of to follow up and go, well, who's normal? Who is that one guy who's sitting there right on the 50% line and is normal? Everybody has strengths and weaknesses and advantages and disadvantages. So to say I'm in or I'm out of the club is kind of silly because there are degrees to that, right? And so what challenges does it create for you? What opportunities does it create for you? What adjustments do you have to make to live the life that you want to live? That's going to be a highly individualized conversation that knowing your diagnosis isn't going to really tell me much.
Yeah, normal exists along 2 lines. One is the statistical mean. It's mathematical, it's not actual. And the people who fall in line with whatever trend the powers that be have decided to push, then everybody who falls in line and conforms, those are the normal folks. Folks that are neurodivergent, if they were masking, they may be able to fool pretty convincingly, but it's unsustainable. They're much better just being a human where you're going to trip over yourself and make mistakes sometimes. And if everybody else could just own the fact that they do it too, who would be left to point fingers and laugh?
Before we go on, I want to say a few words about Anew Behavioral Health. Anew Behavioral Health is an outpatient provider of mental health and substance abuse services in Ohio and New Hampshire. That means that Anew can successfully treat mental health and substance abuse issues or dual diagnosis if you're struggling with both. Their integrated approach allows for them to successfully address issues related to anxiety, depression, addiction, trauma, and really anything that stands between your life and the life you could be living. You really cannot bring them an issue that they have not successfully treated. They have also solved one of the biggest problems for people seeking help. They have a dedicated team waiting to hear from you at helpnow@anewbh.com. If you contact them today, within 24 hours, you will have heard back from, wait for this, a real live person, and will also have your first appointment scheduled at that time. So how do you contact them? Well, if you're in Ohio or New Hampshire, you're probably close to one of their local locations. You're welcome to go in. If not, you can always reach them online at anewbh.com. And if you're interested in services for you or loved one, use that address, helpnow@anewbh.com. Well, and I think that happens on the dysfunction side too, right? I mean, I'll give you an example. So we have, my kids are in sports, and we had an outbreak of children in their school who were developing tics, right? And they're just like physical kind of tics. And you start looking almost like a genealogy tree, right? This became where you got your tic from where, and you got it from where, and you trace it back. And there were several children who were struggling with that legitimately, right? But through their own adaptability had become popular, had become, part of the center of the social circles. And so in essence, subconsciously, not on purpose necessarily, because they're 6 years old, they're not saying, I think I'm going to try this out, but they were kind of trying it out. And so there had to be some education that kind of went around about like, okay, how do we handle this? How do we handle children who are sort of like emulating elevated peers who happen to deal with, challenges, and now they're they're emulating the challenges as well. When I was growing up, I had a young man played basketball who was incredibly fast, probably the fastest, these are the legends, right? The fastest guy in 3 counties, but he had an underdeveloped right leg and had a brace on the back of his calf, and he ran with a hitch. He would run like this with a little kind of giddy up, but he could fly. I mean, he had adapted and could absolutely smoke anybody. And so in my elementary school, kids started running with a hitch because they were just sort of emulating somebody, right? And so when you say the normal that the powers that be push out, I see it on the other side too, right? Where it becomes the dysfunction du jour or the buzzword of the day, right? And ADD was there for a while. Really currently some of the gender ideology stuff seems to be really being front and center. And you're seeing numbers that pop up that were like, okay, one generation ago, 3% of the people identify as this. Now, 40% of the people identify. Is that because we're better at diagnosing, or is that because there's that social contagion piece? I mean, it's never one answer or the other. It's always a mixture, but that's interesting to see that phenomenon play out.
People can't pretend that social media is not driving a lot of this. One generation ago, we didn't have Facebook or Twitter or all this stuff. Now we do. So would we have the increased diagnoses if there were only books being written? No, I don't think so.
Which now we're going to go down the rabbit hole. How much of it is real, right? And how much of it is self-fulfilling?
One of the biggest challenges is there's no blood test for any of this. It's purely subjective. They give people self-quizzes, and they're assuming a person has the self-awareness and isn't tripping over their own denial and rationalization and are going to give straight up honest answers to these questions. And that the way they're presenting hasn't been rehearsed, that they're answering your questions honestly. Maybe somebody just wants the Adderall. So they know what they're supposed to tell you to get the Adderall.
I remember when I was in grad school, people openly talked about what you need to say to your doctor.
That is so heartbreaking.
And so, because it was the study aid, right? And so, be like, hey, look, you want to get your papers done? You want to be ready for comps? You want to, you're going to need to get this. And it was an open conversation. And I know that, our school wasn't the only one that was talking like that. So now you don't even have to be in a classroom talking like that. You can just scroll and get the same information.
Yeah, it's everywhere.
What a lot of your frustration, and rightfully so, seems to be with the way the schools were treating your children. What do schools get wrong about this currently? Where are they falling short? Where are they making mistakes still?
One of the biggest mistakes they're making is continuing to give neurodivergent kiddos this generalized education. My skill set is pretty much wrapped around speaking, writing, specific kinds of problem solving. I can't do math to save my life. My memory is awful. I remember something for seconds. And if I don't write it down, the likelihood of me remembering it, chance. What's really important to do for these kiddos is to find what they love to do that is monetizable and help them turn that into a career. This other stuff, they're likely not going to do it, find a way to do without it, or they're going to delegate it somehow. I have an account for my math stuff. My wife is just an absolute Jedi when it comes to organizational stuff. So if I need to figure out some kind of a flow chart or a spreadsheet or something, she can do in seconds what would take me a week to do. So you find people that counterbalance your areas of challenge, because what they end up doing instead is teaching kids that what they're interested in is unimportant and they need to learn to do everything that makes them feel like an idiot. And people are on their case. You got to work on your stuff. You got to work on more of what makes you feel like an idiot so you can get your grades up.
Do you think the solution is almost different schools, different curriculum, where once you're diagnosed, you change tracks? Like, because if I'm a school administrator, right, I'm saying, look, I got 500 kids here, right, and the state is telling me these are the test scores that I need. What do I do with the 50? And I'm, by the way, I've barely got enough teachers to cover the classrooms as it is. I'm covering lunch duty, right? And teaching, and I'm coaching the basketball team. Like, how do I do 50 accommodation plans? You know what I mean? How do I, if that's even the right number? So are we talking separate schools or separate curriculum? Like, what is the answer?
Teachers need to be at the table of that conversation because I haven't taught in the classroom. I don't know what they've spotted. They probably have a lot to say around that. I would think make it optional, because if you start using assessments and stuff to separate people, it looks far too often like, it's ripe with opportunity for bias. So if there were more discretion on the side of the student, hopefully their parents would know them well enough to say, we've really noticed that he's really good around this stuff, but struggles everywhere else. Can't we just build on those strengths? And if there's a path to do that, all right. When I was going to high school, I had shop class.
Yeah,
there were people graduating and learning how to, maybe they decided to go in the carpentry union because they really did love the woodworking, or they liked playing with the sheet metal, so they went into welding. And they may not have realized that they had a flair for it and an enjoyment of it any other way. But now everything is book learning. Kids need to have more hands-on stuff again, because I've got two boys that are very kinesthetic and struggled in school. If they would have had more opportunities to use their bodies and their hands, they might have felt more competent and had a better sense of what they wanted to do with their lives. At this point, they're stuck.
Yeah, the loss of the trades, neurodivergence design has been a huge step backwards, I think, because we all bought into the track that the only way to success was college, right? So let's do college prep from 9th grade on and then just see what happens from there. But, not everybody goes to college. It's actually still, the minority, and a college degree doesn't mean what it used to mean, right? Now a master's degree is kind of what a college degree used to be, and everything's been knocked down a notch. And oh, by the way, in the meantime, we have this huge manufacturing need. How many kids did we lose along the way who could have met those needs, who could be involved in those trades right now? And also with the development of technology, I think we have a huge opportunity for, computer trades, right? And electronic trades and technology trades, because I've worked with neurodivergent clients. You're right. In a standard school setting, there's just no chance. I'll sit in IEP, individual education plan meetings, and they're like, they want the magic psychological intervention that'll get him to sit up straight and read his history book. And it's like, that doesn't exist. But this guy can reprogram my computer. He can hijack my PS5. He, got into my truck and redid my GPS. So I don't have, the bad system. I have the good system, and did it like in 10 seconds, you know what I mean? With no help whatsoever. So as technology emerges, people who fit that technology, I think, are there, and we need to identify them. So I agree with you.
There was one kid that I met that he got in trouble because he wasn't turning in his homework. He wasn't paying attention in class. But while he was sitting in class with his laptop, he hacked the school's system. I would ask him, why did you do that? I was bored.
Bored, something to do. I need to use this.
Okay, send this kid into cybersecurity.
100%.
Don't focus so much on his penmanship.
Right. On the other side of the spectrum, socially, there's obviously a lot of social challenges if you're neurodivergent, and they change based on the type of neurodivergence. So you've navigated the social waters as a neurodivergent, and you've helped your boys to do the same, I assume.
Well, my younger two are still working on it. My oldest boy, heads and tails beyond where he was. In fact, he's majoring in social work right now.
Oh, amazing. He's got a good role model he's following, it looks like.
I hope so.
When you say they're working on it, how does a neurodivergent work on the social side of life? How can we help them?
Get in situations where opportunities to socialize exist, understand how to initiate, how to self-advocate if you don't understand something. There are a lot of little pieces, but it's how can I engage you, be understood, make sure I understand you, keep it going, finish up, and determine, do we want to do this again? And having those benchmarks helps kind of give you some goalposts.
So it's amazing to hear you talk about it, right? Because I've just never thought that way, right? To me, everything you broke down in sort of analytical steps, I would call just hang out, just hang out with people and see what happens. So it's almost like a different language to help interpret the same experience, but to process it.
It's much more direct and deliberate. And a lot of the strategies I've come up with over the years were ways to enroll the other person in being okay with that. Because when people say, oh, not everybody is comfortable with that. Some folks are more comfortable with the hinting. And my understanding is that the South is like that, hinting, innuendo, between the lines. And I simply can't do that because I don't understand the obscurity. So I've learned that I need to present it. I'm not going to give it away now because it's my secret sauce. But there are ways that you can ask questions of the other person to help them realize that if they allowed me to communicate the way I need to, they have a greater likelihood of being understood. And that's something that's very important to them.
So it's almost cueing from you to the person who's trying to communicate with you that allows them to understand how to cue back to you in an understandable way.
So they will essentially give me permission to be direct and circumvent all of that hinting and stuff because I help them look at the situation in a way that they realize the shortest distance between me being understood and seen by this person is to allow this kind of communication.
I love how because I'm not working directly. I've worked with neurodivergence and everything comes through the practice, but I'm not specializing. And so I love to hear how the language is changing around this and the approach is becoming more specific and it seems like actionable and more intervention specific. Because I'll just tell you from like a social aspect, and early on, what caught my eye for a little bit is the concept of like social dyssemia, which are people who don't pick up on those social cues. And this is an old concept. I read a book probably 15 years ago, and it was talking about social dyssemia. And it was like the guy at the office who just doesn't get the jokes, right? The kid in the school who just doesn't quite seem to be on the same page as all the other students, right? And how they become left out. Because I think socially, and especially at a young age, people are just like, hey, something's not adding up here. This guy's weird. It's just a weirdo. You know what I mean? And so what happens after that? Like, well, here comes the rejection. Here comes the distancing. Here comes the social isolation, right? So I just love that it feels like these are ways to build bridges and not lose those people along the way.
It's interesting you use that metaphor because a lot of what I describe I do is building bridges and closing communication gaps. In very rare cases, there doesn't seem to be anything to bridge the gap. But sometimes what makes the difference is just staying with it a little longer, reaching out to a few more people, and then you find, oh yeah, I've come across that. This is what I did that works, or this is the technology that you probably never heard of, but I'm aware of. You might want to look it up.
And I like that terminology too about communication gaps. So are there certain types of communication gaps or standard types of communication errors?
One of the big ones is assumption making, believing that you know what the other person is thinking or feeling without asking them.
Mind reading.
And then you believe that your assessment is as good as fact.
And that's something that a neurodivergent is more likely to do, to engage in, or people working with neurodivergent?
That's something people do. That's a mistake we all make. And it causes problems for everyone.
Almost like CBT, right? Whether these maladaptive patterns, these maladaptive thought patterns, there's a list of communication errors that are established that we all fall into, and that makes life harder on a neurodivergent. And they have to learn how to navigate those, or at least be able to navigate a portion of those if they're going to successfully integrate and have social connection. Is that the goal?
A lot of these are cultural issues, these communication issues. So really looking deeply at them and asking yourself, why do I do this? Well, it was modeled for you by the people that raised you who picked up these bad communication habits from the people that raised them. And when I was learning how to try and circumnavigate this whole nonverbal stuff, what I realized is disproportionately the people doing them never questioned them. They did it because that's what you do. And when they started questioning it, they realized, I really have no reason to do it this way. And then I could suggest, well, I thought of a different way we could do it. Would you like to try it out? And then I could somewhat, just through that whole conversation, make them more comfortable with the idea that I have a choice here. I don't have to do it the way I've been taught because I really have no good reason to do that. So I like the way you do it. Let's start doing it that way. And now you've got some movement. And because of what I want to be able to do, in part, create a more welcoming world for my sons, I've learned how to, like I said, help a person realize that there are more options available to them that don't require them to mask and dodge and play a role and pretend to be something they're not. They can show up with authenticity and invite other people into it. And because you model that it is safe to do that with you, other people are much more inclined to try it on.
I love what you're saying. I think part of it that feels kind of sad to me is that the person, it feels like the person who is afflicted or challenged in this way is almost responsible for doing the work to make the people who aren't afflicted feel more comfortable in engaging with them, right? So it's like,
look at the 60s. Who was doing the marching? They did bring some of the, quote, oppressors group over to their side, but by and large, the ones who were suffering had to hold up the mirror to their oppressor and say, look at what you're doing. And it doesn't work for you either. That's a lot of my message. It doesn't work for you either. Let's find something better.
yeah, because the other people are left with only one choice, which is to reject you, right? I've got to get away from
normal.
you.
You're so weird. Do it like everybody else. Everybody else isn't happy with their way either. They're all walking around with imposter syndrome, terrified that any moment they're going to be kicked out of the in group, you know?
You use the phrase oppressor. So for somebody who's going through this, holding up the mirror to the oppressor, if you're having that experience, you're neurodivergent, you're facing these challenges, you're facing the social rejection, does it feel like a form of oppression? Like, do your sons feel, your clients feel like oppressed and held down and marginalized? Like, is that how they're feeling on a day-to-day?
When you look at things systemically, when the whole school seems to be unwelcoming, or when an employer seems to be unwelcoming, it feels like the system is the issue. In a lot of ways, it is. Or if there's a group of people that you go to school with, that group can be oppressive because they're a bunch of bullies. And if they hold the power to deny you access to things you need, they are oppressors. They're not just people with bad attitudes. They are keeping you out.
Learned helplessness is a real risk.
Yeah. After a while, you just become grateful to be there.
Feels like the classic bullied scenario. Like, let me get through the day, not being outed. Let me stay quiet. Let me be in the shadows because I just want to get home safe.
I was at school because I had to be, and somebody'd be mad at me if I wasn't. I was always looking over my back or my shoulder because somebody would try and come up and trip me or push me into a locker or something. And I would leave one class and I would bolt, walk as fast as I could. You know, I probably could have been a good New York taxi driver when I come to think of it. The way I was able to maneuver in between people. But yeah, it was all about how fast can we get to the next class where we're safe and a teacher's watching. And after school, how soon can I get to the door and out of here before any of the bullies see me? So I watched the clock a lot and just prayed for the day to end quickly.
And that's a childhood.
That was my childhood.
And bathrooms are war zones.
Well, you would try and use it at the last minute, or you try to get a pass. Because if there were multiple people in there at one time and one of them didn't like you, they'd make a point of letting you know.
And you using that phrase earlier about, what does it really cost us to create a more welcoming environment for everybody, right? So if the goal is, it's not even like, let's change the world for these folks. It's like, let's stop actively hurting them. Let's stop the constant messaging that you don't fit and you don't belong, because unfortunately, a lot of those kids, adults as well, are going to eventually believe that. And when you land at a place of, I don't fit, your options at that point are not great and very sad. What does it cost somebody like me who says, I don't think of it like that, I think about just hanging out, to just to take one more step? You said push through one more step and create another opportunity, a more welcoming environment for everybody, right? It's like one candle to another. Like, you don't lose your flame by helping light another candle, right? So what's the cost of that? Because we hear the price. The price is a forgotten child who's trying to survive, who's sprinting to the door to avoid abuse, who's strategically using the restroom to minimize their chances of damage. It's, Brian, you're a great example now, and in a lot of ways you're a success story. But that's a very sad story to think about somebody's childhood that way, and to think about, for every Brian King, how many did not successfully navigate that.
I meet them all the time. I find adults that are absolutely still living with that shame. They either haven't had the resources or they simply won't seek them out. Many women over the years who are quiet and isolated and have very few relationships, and they could go to therapy, but they have all these reasons not to do it. So they're basically sticking with the devil they know and denying themselves the full human experience because, well, I don't want the therapist to think I'm crazy, or I don't like talking about the negative things. All these things that basically mean I'm afraid it's going to be too painful to look at this stuff. And having looked at that stuff and gone through some incredibly tormenting releases and sobbing and all that, it's terrifying while you're in it, absolutely worth it when you come out the other side.
That's the old phrase. We're not telling you it'll be easy. We're telling you it will be worth it.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
And that's true. That's another thing that I've told clients quite a few times is like, yeah, at first you're going to feel worse. Welcome. I'm glad you're in therapy. It's going to get worse before it gets better. Just so you know, because all that stuff that you've been avoiding, you now have to face. We're going to go through it, not around it. To build on that, what I'd asked you earlier, what people are getting wrong and not doing right, but what progress has been made? How is life getting better for neurodivergence? How are systems adjusting to be able to accommodate them? Like, what progress has been made in this field?
The main progress, I think, is in IEPs, understanding more room, the different areas where a student may need accommodation and how to do it more precisely. The system-wide issue is that not every school district has the same money to afford the staff they need, the training the staff needs, and that doesn't change the government mandates. The government just says, oh, you didn't have the training? Oh, you don't have to educate those kids then. You're good. They're going to hold your feet to the fire regardless. So the staff and the students suffer that because the government didn't give them the funding they needed to meet the mandates.
Given the magic wand to change the world, is that where you would start, is funding for specialized programs?
If the funding were utilized in a perfect world, pretty evenly across the board, so the teachers got the same training and the same income, so that the poor kid living in the ghetto with one parent working two jobs gets as much of a chance as the white kid living in suburban wherever, whose dad has all these benefits and can afford all these services. If they both get the same shot, then we've really accomplished something.
Equity and inclusion again. Yeah. Do you see a differential impact in different communities of color, communities based on financial resources? Are you seeing a gap there?
Whenever there is a disparity, you're going to see a gap. Whether there's an ism that's at play, religious differences, cultural differences, gender differences, wherever you are distinct in a way that can other you, that can cause you to be locked out of access to resources. If I could wave my magic wand, I think it would be allow us to see each other through compassionate eyes, see each other as human beings. If we were able to come from that place, we could be authentic, we could be vulnerable, we could see the individual and not just the mask. So,
not just the differences. I think there's so much. I think about this in terms of workplace psychology and IO and stuff like that. But I just think, having run some businesses, been working for a long time, and just being in relationships, we have this default setting to zero in on what people aren't instead of zeroing in on what they are and building on that.
In our very competitive culture, finding another person's weakness is what makes you successful.
Problem spotting gets rewarded. I was a baseball player. Babe Ruth, the greatest baseball player, I think one of the greatest hitters ever, if not the greatest. Had more home runs than entire teams. You just don't hear anybody say, yeah, but he didn't steal too many bases. He was kind of slow. It's like, no, he was a great home run hitter. Like, why don't we just let him be a great home run hitter, right? And I worry about in today's world, Babe Ruth might not get drafted because he couldn't steal a base. and the guys who can steal bases, we might not draft them because I'm not sure they're going to hit home runs. If there's just this, Eskimos have 100 words for snow. It just seems like Americans in the modern world like have 100 words for problems, or 100 words for, not good enough or deficit or whatever word you want to come up with. So I agree with you. And that's why, I close every podcast by saying, take care of yourself and take care of each other. And I mean it. I mean both of them equally, because I think they're equally important. I really do. We've talked a couple of times. We're getting short on time here. I know we're not going to cover it all, but you've said the word resources several times. We're waving the magic wand. So put the magic wand down in the world that currently exists. If somebody does receive this diagnosis, or you suspect this diagnosis for yourself or a loved one, what are those resources? Where would you point people to learn, or where would you point people to get help?
Well, there's certainly not community resources. That's a very mixed bag. There are some states that are rocking it, and there are some states that could care less. And it's really shameful that that's allowed to happen, where depending on your political leaning, you get to ignore an entire community of people. It's just despicable that's allowed to happen. So have a community center in every community or every county where parents could come in for teaching. Kids could learn to play and work with occupational therapists so their parents can actually catch their breath. Like I said about getting all the training that's necessary in the school system. I don't want to say that the good online communities, because that's subjective, but I guess do your due diligence in finding the online community that's right for you. Because some are filled with people that want to make the oppressor pay. They're very angry and aggressive and combative, and you can't have a conversation with them. Then there are the ones that want to listen as much as they want to talk. And they're in for win-win solutions. That's where I tend to gravitate.
Well, and it sounds like the overarching theme too is if you're going to have difficulty connecting because of this challenge, the first step is going to be to find places where you can connect. That seems like to be a big step in the right direction. Is, okay, you're disconnected from your social circle, school, whatever. Let's find ways and means that you can connect, whether it be even around a trade or similar interests, or clubs and neurodivergence, or online resources, or within therapy groups or after school groups. Where can you connect? Because that's going to offset a lot of those challenges, just to have a tribe that you're part of. If you're feeling like you're not part of anything, how do you find your tribe and be part of something?
Finding any community where you get to just be yourself is a wonderful place to grow from. Because without that foundation, it's kind of hard to know where you want to land.
Brian, listen, we could go another 3 hours and probably still just be scratching the surface, but I want to thank you for this hour. It's been amazing. I've learned a lot. How do people find you, and how do people connect with you if they should be so inclined?
I'm really easy to find throughout social media. I'm kind of everywhere. I also have a website, briancanhelp.com.
briancanhelp.com. And of course, Leo will put that all down at the bottom and make sure that we connect. But seriously, Brian, thank you so much. And what I love so much about your story is the personal aspects. You're clearly an expert in your field. But I'm really struck by your sons and you and your journey through this together, and how much progress you've made individually. And you nailed it, being relentless. In sales, they say, don't take no for an answer, right? It sounds like Brian King's not taking victim for an answer, so that's
not a chance. And I'll take no from somebody, but that just means they're not the right person for me to be talking to.
So that's their no, but not yours.
Right.
Brian, thank you, man. I appreciate the time. I appreciate it so much. And again, with time being our most valuable resource, I always want to reach out and thank the viewers and the listeners. If you've spent some time with us, spent some time with Brian, I hope you've learned a little bit. If you'd like some more information on this, or you feel like you need a diagnosis, obviously Brian has his resources at the bottom. He would be the first step for sure, because he is an expert in this. But if you're in Ohio or New Hampshire, I always give a shout out to our sponsors, Anew Behavioral Health. You can find them at anewbh.com. You can email them helpnow@anewbh.com. If you're somebody who is dealing with neurodivergence, feeling like something is off, you have an existing diagnosis, Anew offers psychiatrists, they offer nurses, they offer therapists, they offer groups, they offer mental health care, they offer addiction support, case managers as well. they're going to be the answer for you, or they're going to help you get to that answer. So want to give a shout out to our sponsors. And again, thanks to all of you for the time today. Thank you, Leo, for driving. Everything went really smooth as always with Leo at the wheel. So we're happy for that. And again, thank you, Brian, for coming by. Check out the resources below. You can go to our website as well if you need any additional information. And again, just thanks for stopping by. Until next time, take care of yourself. And like Brian was talking about, and like I'm feeling right now, you've got to take care of each other. So do that as well. Thanks so much. Hey guys, although Through Help and Back is an excellent podcast with a lot of great ideas, I do want to let you know that in no way is Through Help and Back expected to be perceived as or relied upon in any way as specific medical advice or mental health advice for you personally. The information provided through Help and Back on our website or our podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment that can be provided by your own providers. Do not use our content in lieu of professional advice given by qualified medical professionals, and do not disregard professional medical advice or delay seeking professional advice because of the information you have read on our website, heard on our podcast, or otherwise received from us. Although we love discussing issues related to healthcare, mental health, and addiction, we are not providing direct healthcare, mental health care, medical, or nutrition therapy services. We're not attempting to diagnose, treat, prevent, or cure in any manner whatsoever any physical or psychological ailment, any mental or emotional issue, disease, or condition. We are not giving you specific medical, psychological, or religious advice whatsoever. Please take care of yourself and take care of others as you always seek the advice of your own medical providers and your own mental health providers regarding any questions or concerns you have about your specific health, or before implementing any recommendations or suggestions from us. These are ideas that have worked for other people. We think it's important to share them. We do not guarantee that they will work for you specifically. Do not stop taking any medications without speaking to your physician, nurse practitioner, physician assistant, mental health provider, or any other healthcare or medical professional. And if you have or suspect that you have a medical or mental health issue, contact your own healthcare provider promptly. Also, one last thing, if you know or suspect that you are currently experiencing a crisis, it is absolutely imperative that you seek the advice of your doctor or other emergency healthcare services prior to ever thinking about using our content. We love the conversations. We're glad you're stopping by. We hope you take a lot from the content. But again, for your specific individual medical situation, please always seek quality personal care from your own providers. Do not let this information or this advice stand on its own. Thanks so much for listening.